30 years after the end of the Troubles, Northern Ireland is burning yet again. Let's be clear. Social transformation without representation could be the death knell for the modern Western nation-state. I'm Josh Hammer, and this is The Josh Hammer Show. The Troubles is probably not something that you think a whole lot about. Chances are you actually might not even know what it refers to. In short, the Troubles was a roughly 3-decade stretch of time from 1960s until 1998 with the signing of the Good Friday Agreements in that particular year that saw lots of conflict in the island of Ireland. Northern Ireland, as you probably, but perhaps don't know, Northern Ireland to this day is part actually of the United Kingdom. It is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You have Scotland, England, and Wales on the island of Great Britain. And then you have the northern part of the island of Ireland. It's Northern Ireland. It's actually not part of the Republic of Ireland. It's part of the United Kingdom. The Troubles was a multi-decade-long social conflict whereby this tension was resolved, not always in particularly healthy fashion. Even if you are not familiar with the history of the Troubles, perhaps you're familiar with the band U2. I know I used to be a big fan of U2, and one of their most famous songs of this particular Irish band, U2, was Sunday, Bloody Sunday. Well, Sunday, Bloody Sunday is a reference to the eponymous Bloody Sunday that happened during the course of the Troubles. It was a very bitter conflict between two dueling national visions of the Republic of Ireland and British nationalism, the British nationalism happening in the latter years, frankly, of British power, which continued to wane and wane and wane after World War II, and so forth. And also, it was a bitter religious conflict at times between the Protestantism that predominates on the island of Great Britain and the Catholicism that predominates on the island of Ireland. Northern Ireland is a roughly 50-50 Protestant-Catholic divided country. That was then. This is now. Now you probably think of Northern Ireland only because of Rory McIlroy, at least if you are a golf fan like me. Rory McIlroy, one of the greatest golfers in this century, is from Northern Ireland. But Northern Ireland has been back in the news for the past week because there have been all sorts of riots happening across the city of Belfast, which is the capital and largest city there in Northern Ireland. So to cut to the chase here, what happened was this past Monday evening, on the evening of June 8th, a Sudanese national, a so-called asylum seeker, indubitably not seeking a legitimate form of asylum, a man by the name of Hadi Oladin, was arrested for blinding a local Belfast man with a kitchen knife in the eye. Now, the media, you will not be surprised to know, is not emphasizing what Hadi Oladin's underlying religion is. I will just leave you with this. He is a Sudanese national. The country of Sudan has a roughly 97% Sunni Muslim population. The Christian population, give or take 2.5%, 3%. Unfortunately, it's going only down because of the repression from the Sunni Muslim majority. So you can make your own conclusions there. So this happened, and this individual was promptly arrested, so I guess give a modicum of credit where credit was due. And he has been charged with attempted murder, possession of a knife in a public place, and making vocal threats to kill. In response to that, though, Belfast has utterly erupted. There have been all sorts of riots. Police have been forced to deploy water cannons. A lot of protesters have been hurling bricks and bottles at police. There have been vehicles torched. These images are not great. A lot of these images, frankly, are somewhat redolent of this 2020 summer of love after the martyrdom of our great Saint George Floyd. And as I mentioned, there were water cannons from police. A lot of families were forced to flee burning buildings. The Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service responded to 62 incidents in a single night, and as of right now, at least 2 to 2.5 dozen people have been left homeless. Now, the media, as you can imagine, is reporting this as just far-right violence and a bunch of fascist hooligans and this and that there. And I want to make our stance very clear here. We are not defending random acts of arson, random acts of mobocracy. If you are going home to home in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood, a predominantly migrant neighborhood, predominantly Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, whatever neighborhood, and just trying to start fights for the sake of starting fights, then you are not a good person. We are vehemently, viciously against mobocracy on this show. No doubt about that. Having said that, there is an important point to make here. And the point is this. the elites in charge, so whether that was the first minister of Northern Ireland, whether it was Keir Starmer himself, the prime minister of the UK, the elites in charge in both Northern Ireland and in Westminster in London have been quick to throw these arsonists, these protesters, many of whom, again, are committing bad acts, many of whom are not committing bad acts, I should also add. They've been quick to throw them under the bus. But there is a total demonstrable refusal to actually grapple with the underlying issue. The underlying issue is that the United Kingdom and Ireland, for that matter, both countries, both islands of the two British Isles, the island of Great Britain and the island of Ireland with those blurred national lines, both islands have been completely overrun with mass Muslim migration in recent decades. You had first had the mass importation of Pakistani nationals into central and to northern England. That was happening for. Well, it was happening for a while in the late 1990s into the 2000s and on there for a while. And you've had all sorts of other explosions of Muslim populations happening there on the British Isles as well. So just a couple of years ago, there was a horrific incident where there was a mass stabbing of a girls' dance class that happened in Southport over in England. And at the time, there were all sorts of quote-unquote anti-immigrant riots. There was a somewhat similar incident happening almost a year to the day, actually, in Northern Ireland just last year. So the point is this, folks. The point is that this is going to keep on happening unless there is some accountability, when it comes to our elites, when it comes to grappling with the underlying policy choices there. And I've got a lot more to say on this, but I do want to just give a quick word to our sponsor for today's show, which is Angel Studios. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about what's gone wrong in modern culture, modern media, and frankly, the way American history is often distorted. And that's why I'm genuinely excited about this new film, Young Washington, coming to theaters this Independence Day. It is a brand new film coming out on July 3rd from Angel Studios. I have seen the preview. It is an absolutely fantastic film. I am an American history buff, and let me tell you, I actually learned a lot from watching the heroic actions of young Washington out on the front lines during the French and Indian War. What makes young Washington different is that it actually respects the audience and it respects the truth. Because before the presidency, before victory in the Revolutionary War, this was a young man shaped by hardship, failure, and the unmistakable hand of Providence guiding his path. And let's be honest, Hollywood almost never tells stories like this anymore. That's why Angel Studios is so important. So if you want to see Young Washington, the best deal yet, folks, join the Angel Guild for $15 a month and get 2 free tickets, plus streaming access and tickets to future Angel releases all year long. You can go to angel.com/hammer today. Join the Angel Guild for just $15 a month. And make sure to go ahead and check out the brand new summer blockbuster, Young Washington, which will come out this Independence Day weekend. You will not regret this. Angel Studios is a sponsor for today's show. The underlying issue, folks, is social transformation without representation. The notion is that we in the Western countries do not necessarily want our countries to be completely overrun with migrants of backgrounds, whether they are ethnic, national, religious, or some other various form of cultural backgrounds that simply do not match the actual population at hand. Period, full stop, end of story. We did not vote for this. We in America did not vote for mass quote-unquote asylum migration from various Muslim countries. And frankly, the people of the UK and the people of Ireland did not do so either. There was actually a somewhat related story that happened here on the home front just yesterday. The timing was somewhat eerie, happening the same week that Belfast is burning due to a Sudanese asylum man blinding a local Northern Irishman. And there was an interesting press conference that happened just yesterday with Wayne Mullen, who is the DHS secretary, flocked at his side by the nominee for permanent Attorney General, Todd Blanche, and I am very supportive of Todd Blanche, hope that he actually gets confirmed as the full Attorney General. And at this joint press conference, there were a lot of things that were said. So, for instance, here was Wayne Mullen talking just yesterday at this joint DHS-DOJ press conference about how there are at least 146,000 missing children as a result of the Biden administration's open border policy. Here was Wayne Mullen just yesterday.
To allow 450,000 kids to go missing throughout this country. President Trump has made it a point to go find these kids. And because of our partnership with HHS and DOJ, Department of Homeland Security, truly using the best, which the Democrats sometimes want to demonize, because a lot of times this is ICE, this is HSI, this is CBP. These individuals that the Democrats seem to want to defund, but because of President Trump, we finally funded them for 3 years. We're able to push and go find these kids. We found 146,000 kids so far. 146,000 kids. We still have nearly 300,000 missing. We're investigating reports to where some of these kids claim that they were raped 600 to 700 times. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you have kids, if you don't have kids. I don't care if you're a liberal, you're independent, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. If you can't stand for law enforcement to go find these kids, who are you?
It's actually even worse than that. So Wayne Mullen saying elsewhere in that same press conference, there are over 15,500 so-called super sponsor cases that we have identified, he says, along with the department. These are super sponsor cases that involve rapists and pedophiles. So what he's basically saying is that the Biden DHS let in, whether it was Mayorkas, whether it was Merrick Garland, whether it was the president, Kamala, whoever it was, they let in rapists, pedophiles, and people, more generally, who are causing us nothing but harm. This is absolutely, absolutely astounding stuff from Wayne Mullen yesterday. And it's just another reminder, folks, that we have a country. And what does it mean to have a country? First, to have a country, you must have borders. That's what the Europeans feel that they're lacking. That's what ultimately led to Brexit, to go back to the UK back in 2016. Unfortunately, most of the other countries of the European Union have not been so lucky and have not cast similar votes to Brexit. But more than that, you need more than borders. You need some degree of mass cultural buy-in. America has this background cultural norm of civic Protestantism. We talked about it on the show many times. Absent some sort of underlying cultural civic touchstone, a country will be in very, very bad shape. And unless and until our societal elites are willing to have that conversation, unless and until they're willing to have that, folks, more cities like Belfast were burned. That is just the unfortunate, albeit the hard-hitting truth of the matter. Folks, we're going to a quick break. We'll be right back with much more after this. Welcome back. You know, earlier in the show, I was talking about this upcoming film, Young Washington, which is a product of our sponsor for today's show, Angel Studios. It's a great film coming out this Independence Day weekend. But it's a reminder, folks, that this is the 250th anniversary of the greatest nation ever conceived by mankind. And it's a time to think about why we fought. Literally, why did we fight? Why did George Washington take up arms? Why did Paul Revere have this famous midnight ride there in Lexington and Concord in 1775? Why did any of this happen? Why did those brave men sign their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor, risking it all of it? And some of them did lose all of it, by the way. Why did they do that? Well, one of the rally cries was no taxation without representation. You had the Tea Act, the Stamp Act, and various other repressive measures from King George III. They're pretty much all enumerated, by the way, in the actual full text of the Declaration of Independence, which I encourage you to read this July 4th. It is a wonderful annual civic habit to get involved in. The point is, if America fought an entire revolution, among other reasons, but really for many reasons, for perhaps above all, no taxation without representation, if that was the thing that they fought for, imagine what they would have thought about social transformation without representation. The notion that we, the people, who are defined as the sovereigns in this country, as defined in the preamble of the Constitution, this is the premise, above all, of America, to be clear. We have no kings, we have no monarchs. The question of who is a sovereign is a very different question, to be sure, in the European model than in the American model. It's one of the reasons that America is qualitatively better than many of the vestigial old countries of the old world. So I'm not sloppily comparing America with our consent to the govern based lowercase r Republican model of sovereignty compared to the old monarchical kingly model of the old world Europe. Having said that, most of the modern European nations would think that they have not just subjects of a monarch, but also something roughly approximating citizens. Roughly. The specifics will depend on the country. So yeah, they should feel pretty strongly too about no social transformation without representation. All of this is ultimately downstream of one of the great intellectual follies, one of the great bits of conceit and hubris of our modern era. And that conceit is this, that all cultures fundamentally are equal. that they are all interchangeable and that human beings fundamentally can be exchanged for one another in a supply and demand curve on a chalkboard in an economics 101 style seminar, the same way that any kind of widget can. The same way that you can have free trade, they say, when it comes to the parts to make a pencil. That's what Adam Smith spoke about a couple of centuries ago. Whether it's free trade when it comes to computer chips or automobile parts or whatever. They say you can do that, and then you can also do that for human beings. It's one of the greatest lies, one of the greatest basket of deplorable goods that the American people and frankly the Western masses more generally have ever been sold. That is why Belfast is erupting this week, and that again is why there will be continually more eruptions in the years to come, unless until our elites solemnly deal with this matter. By the way, Wayne Mullen was actually not just done with what we showed you earlier in the show. At the same conference yesterday, we'll get a little later in the show about the World Cup. The World Cup starting tonight. Team USA playing their first game tonight out in Los Angeles. So there were some referees actually who were denied entry into the United States. A Somali referee and an Iraqi referee, and the super globalist FIFA community. So if you know anything about soccer, these are a bunch of total globalists. That's why they gave Qatar of all places the World Cup 4 years ago. So Wayne Mullen was also asked about this and came out in passionate defense of not letting in people with criminal ties from certain war-torn countries into the country. Here was more from Wayne Mullen just yesterday.
Yeah, policies are we're not going to allow people that have criminal or maybe perceived to have criminal ties to come into this country. I don't care what your situation is. I'm not going to get into why we denied this individual, but there's a reason why this person was denied. Now, the left media wants to go out there and report and say this guy's a victim of because we're, anti-Somalia. No, we're not. We work closely with FIFA and the administration on a regular basis. We talk to FIFA and their directors constantly. Anybody that was denied, we made the case for and showed them why they were denied. Now, to get into the specifics of it, I'm not getting into the specifics of it. But Iran chose that was a difficult path. If there was any country we wasn't going to allow in here, Iran would probably be the reason why we wouldn't allow them in here. But we did, and we worked closely with the individuals with restrictions. And so there was multiple, more than just these two, there was multiple individuals throughout. We have a World Cup here. We got a lot of countries that doesn't exactly have access to the United States, and we did a phenomenal job on getting as many people cleared as we could, but some people just can't clear. And that's just the way it works with getting a visa to come to this great country.
So great stuff there from Wayne Mullen. I think a lot of folks had some questions about him as the DHS secretary. I think that he has proven his bona fides thus far. He mentioned Iran there in his answer, and we probably should turn our attention a little bit to the topic of Iran. So we were caught a little bit flat-footed on yesterday's show. We were talking a little bit about how Trump was talking about all these strikes and bombings there, and then abruptly at the very last minute, Donald Trump did something of a 180 and said that he was going to call off what he had planned to do heavy bombing campaigns on Thursday evening over in Iran. Now, the reporting is that various Arab countries, namely Qatar, the UAE, and allegedly also Pakistan, called up Trump as he was threatening to strike Iran and essentially convinced him to not do so. A little curious, frankly, that the UAE specifically is one of these countries now lobbying Trump not to take greater anti-Iran action. But let's recall that it's the United Arab Emirates that has been the recipient of the single most voluminous amount of Iranian missiles and drones since this war started. A lot of people focus on Israel because they are our top ally in the region, but it's actually the UAE. It's the UAE that's gotten by far the most incoming fires. It's not even close, actually. It's more than twice as much as any other country in the region since February 28th when Epic Fury actually started there. So I have no idea, frankly, what they're thinking in Abu Dhabi, that they are allegedly, based on the reporting, telling Trump to call this off there. But why exactly is Trump doing this? I continue, frankly, to be baffled by what exactly Donald Trump is trying to do exactly here. Now, for what it's worth, he still says a lot of the right things. He still says a lot of the right things when it comes to any deal we reach. We'll make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, that we will make sure that the enriched uranium is taken care of. There's been some rumors of apparently they want to take some of the 60% enriched uranium, which is just one step short of 90% enriched, which is weapons-grade warhead material. There's been some rumors that the United States has a plan to essentially blend down that hyper-enriched uranium to a civilian use capacity under the auspices, under the inspection of the United Nations and the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association. To be clear, there are things wrong with this picture. First and foremost, Iran has a crap ton of oil and natural gas. They do not need nuclear civilian energy. It's been one of the greatest lies that we've been sold for years, maybe decades. The Iranians say, oh, we want a civilian nuclear program. Oh, really? Why? Literally, why? You sit atop one of the world's greatest oil and natural gas fields. You're right across the Gulf from Qatar, which sits above arguably the single largest natural gas field in the world. The Persian Gulf area is completely rich with oil and natural gas. The notion that Iran needs a quote-unquote civilian program is insane. Then, of course, there are problems when it comes to the United Nations, when it comes to IAEA inspectors as well. But having said that, it does at least look like the Trump administration is keeping their goals properly aligned here. For what it's worth, Prime Minister Netanyahu also saying that he and Trump are on the same page. Your mileage may vary as to whether that is just political talk. Bibi has placed a very large political wager for his own election this fall. He's placed a massive wager on the Trump alliance. So maybe he's trying to buttress that alliance for everyone else there. But here was Donald Trump. Trump's been talking a lot about a deal possibly coming in Geneva, Switzerland this weekend. What are the odds of that? Well, I don't know, but Trump was asked about it, and here was his response to a reporter when asked just about that possibility.
Mr. President, on Iran, how confident are you that there will be a signing this weekend? Because you have come close to sealing a deal, but at the last minute it has fallen apart. And
it'll be soon, maybe this weekend.
And has the Supreme Leader approved this deal, sir?
I understand the answer is yes.
And when this deal is signed, is the United States going to immediately lift the blockade?
Yes, that's true. That's part of the deal.
And
you'll have oil prices dropping like a rock.
And sir, have you actually secured an agreement on the discussions about the nuclear material and the nuclear negotiations?
Yes, conceptually on that, and nobody's getting close to it because it's buried under a mountain, basically. There's B-2 bombers.
But has Iran committed to not pursuing a nuclear weapon, or will there be more negotiations on that down the line?
They will not have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that.
A lot to unpack on that exact front there. Some of that being disputed by the Iranians. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll unpack it for you on the other side. Stay with us. We will be right back with much more. So is Trump right? Is there a real possibility of actually reaching a comprehensive deal with Iran this weekend? Well, Iran seems, frankly, not to think so. Iran is sticking to their guns, and they are releasing through various state regime-approved media channels that they are not giving up their own red lines. And their own red lines is that they have the quote-unquote right to enrich uranium however high and however weaponized as they darn well please. So yet again, we see that the Iranians are just being utterly intransigent. And for what it's worth, various other of our allies in the Middle East, Israel and Egypt as well, have downplayed the possibility of a deal and have said that they are not really necessarily part of any deal that could be directly negotiated. So is this going to happen? Well, we've been down this road before, so it's hard to get an exact count, but Eric Erickson trying to tally up the number of times that Trump has mentioned an Iran deal in the last 65 days. That number 65 is relevant because it's more or less around the time of the April 8th ceasefire. And according to Eric's tally, Trump has mentioned the possibility of a deal 39 times over the past 65 days, which is a very short way of saying he's mentioned it a lot. And yet here we are, and there is no deal to be had. And the fundamental reason for that is, as I just explained, Iran refuses entirely to compromise on the sine qua non, on the single and most indispensable condition for Team Trump, for the United States, when it comes to any deal, which that Iran cannot and will not ever have a nuclear weapon. So were the Arab powers yesterday, were they right to telephone Trump at the last minute and to have him do a complete 180 over the course of about 5 to 6 hours and said there will be no more bombing runs? I think probably not. But I guess we'll see. Donald Trump has pulled some rabbits out of the hat before. It seems to me to be fairly obvious that Iran is still not willing to play ball, and I do not understand what other than continued very, very tough actions can possibly bring this regime to the table. Those tough actions are not just kinetic bombing runs, although to be clear, There should be continued bombing of various IRGC militant facilities. There should be more attacks against the missile sites. There should be more attacks against the drone sites. Just yesterday morning, on Thursday, before he abruptly switched course, Trump mentioned the possibility, actually, of seizing Karg Island, which is this island off the coast of Iran that is responsible to the full refining and ultimately the exporting of Iran's petroleum, their very vast petroleum reserves. Trump has mused about this possibility since an interview he gave with The Guardian, the British newspaper, back in 1988. Well, if you're going to mention Mr. President, I think it's probably a good idea. Go ahead and do that. But it's not just kinetic activity. You also should be applying ever-increased more diplomatic pressure, more economic sanctions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't love the fact that there is talk of giving up on the naval blockade. You heard from Joe Pollack on the show just on Thursday that the naval blockade, which the U.S. has had on Iran's oil exporting, has been one of the most effective economic blockades, frankly, of this entire 21st century. Iran's oil-based economy is really, really, really hurting. And if there's anything above all, if there's anything, literally anything, that could bring these fanatical 12th Imam immunizing eschatological Shiite fanatics. So there's anything that could bring these scoundrels to the negotiating table in earnest. I'm actually not sure if there is, but if there's literally anything, it is the real threat, the earnest threat of actually having their regime toppled. And the reason that the regime would be toppled is not necessarily for ideological reasons, although the regime is not super popular on those grounds as well in Iran. They have a base of support, but they're not super popular based on their ideology. The reason that the regime would be in jeopardy is for economic reasons. That's why people went out to the streets last December. That's why they were slaughtered. Is that the economy is not good. Inflation is not good. Resources, basic resources, water, electricity are scarce. So if there's literally anything that could bring the regime to the table, it's hitting them economically really hard while continuing to hit them militarily. So will there actually be a deal in Geneva this weekend? Well, it's frankly a big weekend for Donald Trump. He actually turns 80 years old this Sunday. It's actually my father's birthday as well, so happy birthday both to President Trump and also to my own father. Trump is actually hosting a big UFC fight at the White House to ring in his 80th birthday, something of a preview for the big party on America 250 this July 4th, now happening in just a few weeks. It's also World Cup kickoff, so it's a big weekend, frankly, for the United States. I'm sure that Trump would love, nothing more. Really nothing more than to get this deal inked with Iran this weekend. I'm sure he wants to make it a weekend for the history books. The problem is that it takes two to tango. It just does. This has been the mistake of Western diplomats and statesmen and presidents and senators and this and that and that and that and that for years and years to come. That we treat Iran like a clear, rational, sober actor of a nation filled with clear-thinking, sober, rationally oriented human beings. None of that is the case. None of it. And the sooner that Donald Trump yet again remembers that and yet again stops taking advice from people like the Amir, the Al Thani family in Doha, Qatar, the sooner that happens, I say, the better. So in other domestic news, the Supreme Court is going to be in the news a lot over the next few weeks. There are still a lot of high-profile cases still to be determined over the course of this term. Traditionally, the Supreme Court term ends in the end of the month of June. In recent years, the justices have sometimes gone a little bit into the first week of July. This year, what that means in theory, July 4th is on a Saturday, so they will definitely be wrapped up before then. No doubt, I'm sure the justices will want to go on their annual summer vacation starting Independence Day weekend. So I'd be shocked if they're not done by, let's call it July 1st, July 2nd. They'll probably want to get out of Dodge starting on Friday, July 3rd, if I had to guess there. The point is, there are some major cases still to come out over the next few weeks. Above all, that birthright citizenship case that we discussed a lot on our show. My hopes are not particularly high when it comes to what the court will do on the 14th Amendment underlying substantive question when it comes to birthright citizenship. I very much hope that I am wrong. But regardless of the fact that this court is all but assuredly not going to rule properly when it comes to the birthright citizenship issue, you have Democrats that are still freaking out over this current Supreme Court. And above all, they're freaking out now about the recent Voting Rights Act case, the one that said that, guess what? You actually can't use race when it comes to drawing congressional map making. To which I say, hallelujah. Hallelujah. Isn't this exactly what the civil rights folks actually fought for? Isn't that what Martin Luther King marched for? Is to not use race, to get race out of public life? Well, speaking of Martin Luther King, it is actually the man who formerly was the reverend at MLK's own Georgia church. Raphael Warnock, he's now the dim-witted senator from the Peach State, is Raphael Warnock, who is now bizarrely claiming that the Supreme Court is committing violence against American citizens. Yes, he really said that. Here was Raphael Warnock.
Right now, black voters are at the center of the debate that we're hearing. But I think that the Supreme Court has committed violence against the ways in which ordinary people can have a voice in our system.
Okay, so I have absolutely no idea what he means. Really, I barely even pretend to know how he could arrive at this conclusion. No clue. You have the affirmative action case, the Harvard versus Students for Fair Admissions case that the court decided now 3 years ago, which said that the 14th Amendment actually says that all races must be equally protected under the rule of law. Therefore, you can't use race when it comes to university admissions. What a novel concept. 3 years later now, in this term, in the Voting Rights Act case, the court says, yet again, that you can't use race when it comes to drawing congressional maps. What a novel concept. By the way, I mentioned in passing earlier this week on the show, there was an amazing new opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel inside the DOJ, which is basically the executive branch's in-house constitutional think tank. You can think of it as that, headed up by my law school classmate and good friend, Elliot Geiser. And this new opinion there in the DOJ OLC says that disparate impact liability, the notion that if you take a neutral action and it happens to affect by pure happenstance black people or white people more than the other race, that this is not a legitimate racial grievance claim. Why? Because we have a colorblind society. That's what we have. Speaking of America's founding, folks, that was the vision. That was the vision. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Period. Is a concept that's intellectually downstream of Genesis 1:27. Imago Dei, or in Hebrew, as we say, B'Tselem Elohim, the notion that man is made in God's image. We are all equal. America has at times fallen short. That's why we needed the second founding with Lincoln and the Reconstruction Amendments. That's why we needed the Civil Rights Acts in the 60s as well. We have fallen short. We are a better country today. It is Warnock and the Democrats who want to turn the clock back. I say, do not let them do it. Folks, one final break. We'll be right back with some closing thoughts after this. So again, Raphael Warnock, who once held the reverend position at Martin Luther King Jr.'s church in Atlanta, Georgia, saying that the Supreme Court is committing violence against Americans. All of this is part, more broadly speaking, it's not just that Democrats are trying to turn the clock back and to bring back the race, the centrality of race in American life, which, by the way, was the exact same stance as the slaveholders of John C. Calhoun, of many of the most virulent racists, or all of them, George Wallace, Orville Faubus, all of the horrific, infamous segregationists, paradoxically held the exact same rule about how important and how determinate race is than today's Democrats. Democrats have a long and short history, frankly, when it comes to their obsession with the issue of race. This is one of the great fault lines of American cultural and civic life in the year 2026. This notion that if you can still work hard and still make it, then you can still do great things in America, or that you are unfortunately predetermined to go in a good direction or in a bad direction because you were born into a certain family or a certain skin color or a certain religion or a certain zip code or a certain school district or this or that or that or that. And this notion of predetermination as your success in life is also inextricably linked to the mass rise of grievance culture. All this is predicated on the neo-Marxist concept of intersectionality, where there are structures of oppression, and if you're part of the oppressed class, then you have to take it to the oppressors. That's how you justify violence if you're on the left. That's how you have people justifying Luigi Mangione taking down the CEO of United Healthcare there, because they are taking it to the oppressors, taking it to the man. It's evil. It's absolutely, positively, pathologically evil stuff. But this grievance culture also makes it a little bit into the realm of wealth itself. So the Globe and Mail, which is one of the largest newspapers in Canada, it's possible actually it's the number one largest based on circulation, has a new op-ed titled "SpaceX IPO Makes Elon Musk the First Trillionaire." Here's how to properly hate him. Yes, that's really the title of an op-ed. Now, to be clear, it's an op-ed. It's not a news article, God forbid. But that doesn't make it a whole lot better, does it? So first of all, I think contrary to hating Elon Musk, I think congratulations actually are in order. So SpaceX has made history, in case you've been living under a rock, but the single largest IPO in the history of Wall Street. They have raised $75 billion. The company is valued in the trillions range. And based on the estimated value of Elon Musk's current shares, combine that with his wealth from Tesla and various other ventures, he is, at least on paper as of today, he is the world's first trillionaire. And this is an IPO that has made Wall Street go totally gangbusters. There's been all sorts of rivalrous activity from the various investment banks, the retail investors. Everyone wants to get a cut of SpaceX. Everyone apparently except for the left, who just continues to hate Elon Musk because he has been wildly successful and he has built companies with real and enduring value, companies that actually can change the entire national perspective, frankly, the human race's perspective, when it comes to things like transportation or to be a pioneer in exploring the frontiers. Look, Elon Musk, I have my issues for sure. I mean, the guy has all these baby mamas and he slept around. He's not exactly a paragon of moral virtue. But the notion that Elon Musk has not done tremendous things to the human race is absolutely garbage. But even more generally speaking, you can't hate Elon Musk because he has been successful. It is actually not just wrong to do that. It is evil. How do I know that it's evil? Because God himself said that, and said that numerous times. No, God has not spoken directly about Elon Musk. But what God did reveal to the Israelites back in the day and to Moses standing on Mount Sinai was this thing you may have heard about called the Ten Commandments. The 10th commandment is pretty clear. The English translation that I'm reading off of is as follows, quote, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." In short, thou shalt not covet. You cannot look at what your neighbor has and have this burning envy and say, screw him. I deserve that. Maybe you do deserve the same. In which case, work hard. Do the work and show it. If you don't like the fact that your high school, college classmate, whatever, has a really hot wife and a lot of beautiful children, you're like, why am I still single? Go to the gym, bro. Eat a healthier diet. Take real things to improve your lot in life. Make adult, responsible decisions. Save more than you spend. Invest prudentially. Be frugal. Be responsible. Don't do drugs, etc., etc., etc. There are things you can do to improve your lot in life. But it's this whole victim grievance culture. It's actually two sides of the same coin. The Raphael Warnock attack the Americans thing is actually part of the exact same side of the coin as this horrific Canadian Globe and Mail op-ed about how to properly hate Elon Musk. It's all predicated on this notion that lots of people are victims, and if you are a victim, or at least if you think you're a victim, what they're saying is that the proper recourse is not to try to improve your lot in life, not to do what Clarence Thomas, for instance, did. Clarence Thomas grew up a radical by his own measure. He was involved with Black Panthers. He grew up dirt poor in the Jim Crow South, didn't speak a lick of English, barely had food on the table, but he did the work. He ultimately got to Yale Law School, and that set him on the course of becoming the man, the constitutionalist and the conservative that he is today. It still is possible in America to pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. There was actually, speaking of op-eds, there was an excellent recent op-ed in the New York Times talking about what liberals get wrong about income inequality. And the premise of the article was that some liberal economic think tanks are complaining about the fact that there are, by some measures, a lower percentage of people making it from, let's call it, the lowest quintile of the income spectrum into the second or the third lowest, aka the middle quintile. The problem with that is that you are eliding one of the most important economic statistics. You are omitting the fact that it's not all about climbing from one quintile or one rung of the economic ladder to the next. That definitely is part of it, but it's not the whole story. What if you stay, in theory, in the middle quintile? You stay in the third of the five quintiles of the economic ladder, but in real inflation-adjusted terms, let's say, you're still way, way, way better off than any person in American history in that part of the economic ladder. You see, it's not all relative. This is the fallacy of zero-sum fixed pie economic thinking. It's entirely possible to all improve in real inflation-adjusted terms, and that the relative slice of the pie doesn't really matter as much, because even if you're in the middle class, you're still going to have an iPhone. Maybe you'll have a Tesla. Back in the day, if you're in the middle class, you'd be lucky to have a microwave. Now, if you're in the middle class, you have all the various modern electronics likely at your disposal to use day to day. So this notion of hating Elon Musk because he is the world's first trillionaire is nuts. It is illogical. It is not how one should think about economic mobility, about how he should pull himself up by his bootstraps. And again, it's also just outright immoral, frankly, when it comes to the Ten Commandments and this broader notion that you shall not covet what your neighbor has. It is the recipe for disaster. If you look at success and you say, I want that too, and use that as a healthy motivating factor, fine. But don't hate someone simply because he has had more success, at least as you perceive it, than you. By the way, that's holding aside the whole notion that just because you're super wealthy doesn't mean that your life is a total shambles. You have all the material possessions and your life could be a disaster. I mean, look at Elon with all of these babies and the baby mamas there. Again, not exactly a paragon of moral virtue, but even holding that aside, you can use it to motivate yourself, but don't use it to envy or to covet. That's immoral. God himself said so a very, very long time ago. Finally, today is the opening day for Team America in the World Cup. I mentioned this briefly on yesterday's show. So tonight out in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, it'll be U.S. taking on Paraguay. Marco Rubio will be leading the Trump administration's representation. It'll be interesting dynamic there in the box. It'll be Rubio and Gavin Newsom in the same box, actually, there at the stadium out in Los Angeles there. If you look at the odds, folks, it looks like Spain, France, England, Portugal are the top four in the odds makers' view to win the tournament. I root, obviously, for America. I actually root for England after that. I'm very much an Anglophile, and England has only won one World Cup back in 1966, and they have been overdue for a very, very, very long time there. So I'm rooting for Team America. But if America can't do it, then I hope that the three lions of England can pull it off here. But America is hosting, folks. And if we can make it to the knockout stages, ultimately make it to the quarterfinals, semifinals, who knows? What a remarkable demonstration of strength that would be here as America gears up for our big 250 celebration in a few weeks. Folks, have a great rest of your evening. Have a great weekend for the matter. We'll be right back, as always, on Monday morning.